Welcome to the CRM MVP podcast, episode number 63. Super excited about this episode for one main reason, and that's my guest, Scott Sewell. Welcome to the show.
Thanks.
Again.
Yeah, it's good to be back.
I've recorded one episode before, and the reason why I like talking to you is because if you notice, like all of the episodes that I've recorded, I like to stay away from topics that have a very, very short expiration date. I feel that the guys from CRM Audio and other podcasts do a really good job explaining what's the latest and greatest, right? Telling you exactly what Microsoft just released and kind of telling you how it works and all of that. I try to focus more on topics that you can listen to 2 years from now and it would still be relevant, right?
Okay, yeah.
Try to talk about best practices, things like that. Our episode 1 training still gets downloads. People still listen to it and get value from it. However, the reason why I like talking to you is because I feel that I can talk about future stuff because I know that you will give me a perspective from like the real world because you used to implement Dynamics 365 for a living.
Right.
And even though now you work for Microsoft, right? When I talk to people from Microsoft about what's coming in the future, I typically hear all the marketing and sales pitch, right? Oh, and companies will be able to do this and company. And I feel like every time I talk to you, I'm going to get the truth. Well, this is what I feel is going to happen.
You'll get my perspective on it.
Exactly. But your perspective comes from doing this for real, right? Implementing this for a living. So that's why I really enjoy talking to you about it, specifically about today's topic, which is a little bit about the future. Well, it's kind of like the present because we can do this stuff now, but obviously because it was released recently, this is more kind of a go live in the future thing, right? It's going to be production in the future. Nobody is out there leveraging this technology now that I know of. At least it's got to be a very small number, but I haven't really implemented this stuff. And we're talking about AI more specifically, right? How can we leverage artificial intelligence when it comes to business applications and what Microsoft is doing from that perspective? But before we get started talking about AI, why don't you tell people, if they haven't heard, by the way, the episode that I did with Scott, I believe it's episode 28, please go ahead and pause this and go back and listen to that because we talked about kind of your experience and all the places that you've been working and all the stuff that you've done in the past. But for those that didn't hear that or want to hear maybe an update or what you've been up to since the last time we talked, why don't you tell us who you are and what you do for Microsoft?
Sure. So I am Scott Sewell, and I work for Microsoft, and I've been with Microsoft since January of 2018. Before that, I was working with with Hitachi, and before that, Customer Effective. And so about 15 years now working with Dynamics 365 and CRM before, obviously named CRM before that.
Right.
So about 15 years on this particular platform, spanning the whole business application process. It's been fun to see the evolution of Dynamics from originally this CRM, pretty much just a contact manager application, a contact manager with a really basic opportunity and case management built into it. So that was that's where we started, but pretty quickly as they brought out these abilities to extend it, add additional entities, added additional fields was the big first step.
Breakthrough.
So we got those additional fields. And then we got the additional entities, and we kept getting the ability to extend it more and craft it into a business application platform. I mean, that sounds like a buzzword, but really it was the opportunity to say, here are some new things that this particular business does that somebody else doesn't do. And we needed a place to capture that information and track it and understand it and be able to, and I was able to bring that into Dynamics and make that a part of what we do every day, which was a lot of fun. And so over that time, that's kind of been my journey, is staying with that, saying, here's our basic application we have, and we can build on top of it. But over the last few years, my focus area has shifted to take a look more at the AI and the business intelligence part of it.
That's right.
The platform.
Yeah, and you started the business intelligence and more Power BI and more show, right? Back in the day. But, again, I don't know if we talked about this on the first episode we recorded together, but I don't know if anyone has more experience working with Dynamics than you, honestly. And the reason I say this is because, and like I said, I don't know if I mentioned this, I'm the chapter leader of the CRMUG in Georgia. Mm-hmm. And when we do our regional meetings or whatever, you get to hear from everybody who's in the room and kind of what version of CRM they're using. And I think I told you this, that one of the customers that comes to every single one of our meetings is somebody who you implemented CRM 1.2 for.
Right.
I never even heard of a customer that took CRM 1.2 and then upgraded that to 3.0 and 4.0 in 2011. They're right now in Dynamics 365, all the way upgraded from CRM 1.2 that you implemented for them. So
right.
I was really impressed by that, because I started working with CRM in 3.0, like 1.2. Like, you already had years of experience by the time I started working with CRM, so that's pretty awesome.
Basically, you're just calling me out for being old.
Yeah, exactly. That's
fair enough.
That's exactly what I try to do.
That's accurate.
So let's talk about, as you mentioned, your focus now, which is AI and business intelligence. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I got really excited about a couple of years ago was when Microsoft announced they were releasing this thing called Customer Insights.
Right.
And Customer Insights was amazing to me. The idea that we can take really a 360-degree view of your customer, including data sources that we don't own, like social activities and things like that from social media, and be able to say, here's what your customers overall within your systems and systems outside of your own control, this is what your full customer picture looks like. The fact that I could see, for example, that information from LinkedIn, information from everywhere, really, about this customer, that was mind blowing. And I remember doing demos about this stuff and like selling Dynamics because of that feature. People excited about, because I said, look, this is coming. This is in preview right now. It's coming, but this won't be until like phase 2, phase 3. Let's go ahead and focus on sales right now and customer service or whatever. When we get there, it will be out of preview and we'll be able to deploy it and take advantage of it. And then Microsoft just essentially eliminated it. It went from preview to gone.
They pulled back a little bit.
And what I understand is that they took a lot of the things that they worked into that product and embedded into other products that we have today, essentially. Right? We have AI for sales, AI for customer service, and now we have Customer Insights back in. So Can you tell us a little bit about kind of the ecosystem that is out there when it comes to AI? Because there's a bunch of these products that I don't think a whole lot of people even know they exist, even if they're in Dynamics.
Right.
People, you tell them about Customer Insights and they're like, well, what is that? Is that LinkedIn? Like sometimes they struggle with it. So tell us about everything that's out there and kind of all these moving parts and where do they fit?
Sure. And to be fair, I'll miss some of them, and there'll be some that I don't know yet. So it is a shifting landscape. It's interesting you bring that up because I would say that Dynamics, and I guess probably, let me just step back to my journey through this, is I spent a lot of time implementing Dynamics, helping people get data into Dynamics, and then writing reports off of it, which originally, going back far enough, they were Crystal reports, was the very first version that we had, the very first thing we could write reports with. So I was a Crystal reports writer. Then quickly we got over to SSIS or SSRS reports, which we could write these, these table reports and generate that. And that's all valuable, and there's still value and use for that. And then we got some little dashboards inside the application, which is again enhancements. But I kept saying there's more to the data that sits in Dynamics than what we are exposing to our business leaders or to our team leaders. There's more that all this work that we do to get data in there, and we bring it into Dynamics and kind of munge it around with it and work on it and update it. But there's so much more that we haven't tapped into yet. And that's that ability to say, let's make insights over this information. Let's get some insights out of this. Let's look at trends more than what I can see in just a view, that a list of records that it's up there, or more than I can see in a simple pie chart or something like that. I want to understand where things are moving. I want to understand how things relate to each other in ways that aren't necessarily obvious or intuitive. And as I started seeing the value and the strength of Power BI, I realized, wait, this might be a tool that lets me bring out and expose those insights to the people who are literally the people who are writing the checks for the next version of the application, for the upgrades. When I look at some of our projects that I've worked on, and this is me as a primary person leading the project, I realized that a lot of times our projects, as we got closer to the end of the project, we had spent budget on adding features to the application, or spent budget on adding workflows or other parts of the applications we could enhance. And the budget for the reporting and analytics was always at the very tail end of the project, and that got consumed before we got to the end of the project. And so we got to the end of the project and we looked and said, okay, we can build some really basic reports, but we'll just kick that down to the next iteration. Yeah. And I think that we fell short in delivering value to our business decision makers, or obviously the people who write the checks for the next version of the application. Those folks are left hanging because they don't get the value of what's out there. So that's a long way of getting to. Once I started getting into Power BI, I said, look, I can show insights into the data that aren't obvious just looking at Dynamics. Additionally, I can bring data from outside of Dynamics into Power BI and pull that forward and say, let's make some reasoning over data that we've pulled together in Power BI and expose that and make some give some decision insights to people who are leading our business. So that's been fun. As you step even further down that path, then you get into a situation where Power BI is of a certain scale, but when I'm doing Power BI with Dynamics, kind of the approach that I've been doing.
Right.
When you get up to another scale, you've got this thing where we want to look at insights in a much richer approach across a lot of data, not just Dynamics data, but legacy application data, external data coming in from other signals that's coming in. Right. And I need to bring that together and start making decisions off of it. If you go back a couple of years, there was this approach, Customer 360, and it was a kind of a common term, but there was an Azure team that built this model called Customer 360, and you'd spin up a data warehouse, and you'd spin up data ingestion, you'd bring it all together, and you spin up machine learning on top of it, and apply some really cool tools that were all in Azure, bring all that together that would bring you this visibility into a Customer 360 perspective. All great in theory, and there are teams that are out there that have done that, customers that have been out there doing that. But I'd say the average customer, the majority of customers look at that and go, yeah, when I get around to it, maybe. It'd be nice to have that value.
That's cool, but how about we do this?
We all have a day job right now.
Right.
And how am I going to spin up this and get this running and try to get value and maybe get value out of it? Maybe I don't. I don't know. But it's going to be a big investment of time and effort, not to mention money, before I can even see it. Well, that's kind of where we got to. And the same thing I see with Power BI right now and with some of our AI tools is that there's a promised land out here. There's this promise of this insight that's out here. And there are customers who've crossed over and accomplished and are doing that and really doing some really cool stuff. But not everybody has the time, the skill sets, the patience, just the ability to commit to doing some of the things that some of these customers are doing. And that's where this process is now starting to change. And you're going to see Microsoft starting to, I'll use the buzzword, democratize this AI approach. And that's what I'm seeing in the customer service, the customer insights piece. Yeah. You see it already in the customer service or AI for customer service, or I can't keep the names of the products straight. It's Insights something, who knows?
Right.
I think it's Customer Service Insights or AI for Customer Service, one of those. Just throw AI, throw Insights and sales or service, just mix all those words together and you come up with a product name.
Exactly.
So the one on the customer service side is really kind of a packaged version of some AI and a Power BI dashboard. It's not rocket surgery in itself. Right. If you're comfortable with those tools, you could roll your own. The difference is this thing is packaged. You flip a switch and it cranks up and looks at the insights and brings you back value immediately.
Right.
And if you look at it and you go through your data and it's running and you say, actually, there's not value there's not value in my data that I'm seeing in this, you turn it off.
Yeah.
And you quit paying for it.
Yeah.
And the truth is it's this process where it allows you to go through that, try to capture the value. It's software as a service. You try to capture the value. If it's working, awesome. You've got value and you're live immediately. If it's not, fine.
Stop it.
Or if it is providing value, but you want to go further, then you've already got this platform and you've already got this baseline that you can say, I need this, and that. I don't care about this part of it over here. But you've already got a pattern and you've already got established visibility into your data structures and the data sources that you can ingest. And then you can go say, okay, now I'm going to spin up a project to actually understand this. But I'm starting not from scratch, not from a blank whiteboard. I'm starting from something that's known. And now I'm going to build something that's even more tightly tailored to what I want. I think I'm really happy with the approach that Microsoft is taking, in that as long as I think there will be some people or some part of the marketing material that will sound like this is a end state. This is you turn this on and you have brilliant insights and you're done forever. I think that's a bit of a misrepresentation.
Right.
I think there will be some people who will turn it on and that's all they ever need. And there'll be some people who turn it on and they look at it and say, that is really useful, and that gives us a baseline from which we want to build a much more tailored and custom approach, but we're building it from knowledge of what we have, not from let's just imagine something out of blue sky.
Right. So do you have kind of any specific examples that you use with people when they ask, for example, when you say data, well, we need to extract insights out of our data. If somebody says, well, what do you mean by that? Can you give me an example of that? Do you have like a go-to example that you talk about that? Because the way I've been talking about insights is, it's kind of like if somebody is giving you like inside information, like here's a little bit of more information that can make you win kind of thing, right? It's like if you have somebody working inside a business and they are like, hey, this is their budget or whatever. If they give you a little bit more information that will help you win, that's kind of how I've been explaining this insight. So for example, I have customers that we have used AI for, and we've realized that they have this amazing customer experience building they've built where customers can go and see like their, how their products will look like it's somebody's house or whatever. So they have like an entire house set up. And essentially what we found out by looking at the data is that, let's say their opportunity close ratio was like 50% or something like that. But when we turn on AI, it told us that every time a customer visited that studio, the closing ratio was like 95%, something like that, something ridiculous. And that is an insight that, Dynamics was able to produce that we can now leverage into our sales process and say, okay, now no matter what, we need to find a way to bring these guys to our studio or build another one that is more accessible or whatever. Because if it means that we're winning half our deals and it's going to take that to maybe not 95, but let's say it's 80%. Well, how is 15% of closing deals equal to. Does it make more sense to open a studio maybe on a major city because they're in South Carolina? Maybe they'll say, okay, how about we do it in Atlanta, which is a hub, is a bigger city. How much does that cost? $1 million to build something like that. Well, it's 15% of closing more deals worth $1 million. So now you can start making better decisions because you have this insider knowledge that is something that maybe would have been hard for you to kind of spot, especially when it includes data that you don't even own, that is external data, right?
Right.
That's the way I see it, is a machine that is constantly looking for ways for you to get better at winning or get better at servicing your customers or whatever it is. It's just constantly trying to make you better.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way of starting the conversation. And the reality is most of us can look, and if we sit down with you can grab the BI master application, Excel, bring some data out there. You can run some reports against that and say, okay, let's compare customers who visited that versus customers who didn't visit that. Okay, I can come up with a score, and I come up with some sort of metric that helps me make a decision on that.
But you have to know what to look for.
Have to know what you look for.
Exactly.
But then you start saying, you get into more nuanced things. We say, okay, what if people visited visited this experience in your example that worked with Gus as a salesperson versus people who visited and worked with Scott as a salesperson, or people who are interested in this line of business versus this line of business, or people from the healthcare industry versus people from manufacturing, or people who visited early in the sales process versus late in this. You start getting all
unlimited variables,
the number
right?
of factors that are out there.
Yeah.
The difference is now we can easily, and through this democratization process, as one example, bring it into Power BI and use the key influencers visualization, and it can run through that almost instantaneously, and say, you know what, the fact that they visited gives them a 2x advantage of winning that, and the fact that they worked with Scott was a 1x advantage. But if they worked with Gus and they visited, that's a 4x advantage. There's an accelerator factor.
If it was early in the sales process versus later.
So it's starting to bring together some things. And the cool thing about that has been that I've been able to pull in some data for. I had to use data that was fictitious data,
right.
But I tried to get it to reflect the type of the stories that they were telling me, saying we see an uplift in this factor versus this factor. It was for a financial services organization, and for obvious reasons I couldn't see the real data, but they gave me shapes of the data that they had, and we started pulling that together and saying, okay, here's how we see this data. And here's how you take all these factors individually or as clusters, put them into a big basket, give that basket a shake, and let's see what factor, whether it's the salesperson or the territory or the industry or the sales process experience, or are they selection by an individual or a committee, or do they, is the product, is the discount rate high? Are we giving a large discount or a small discount? Is this an add-on product? All those factors, put them in the basket, give it a shake, and see what rises to the top, and see what are the factors that drive it, as well as do the clustering side and say what combinations of things together make a big difference to our close ratios. Now, that's a really direct thing. I've done the same thing on the close ratio perspective. I've done it based on saying, okay, what drives. That's just the close ratio being, the number of leads or the number of opportunities you have divided by the ones that are other way around, but the number of wins divided by the number of opportunities you have. So you can see, how many things at bats do we have? How many hits do we get? The other perspective might be from the customer service perspective. What leads to a customer service CSAT score, a customer satisfaction score that's higher or lower? Is it the agent that you're dealing with? Is it the product? Is it the fact that they came in through a Cafe X or a chat?
Right.
Versus if somebody came in through the portal? Is it if they have this type of problem versus that product that they're having a problem? bringing all those together and saying, okay, it's easy to compare all the agents against each other. It's easy to compare all the channels that they might come in through together against each other. And the same thing with products. But what about if you bring all that together into a big, again, my big basket, dump it all in the big basket, shake it, see what comes up as being the strongest indicator. Also, you can see, okay, you know what? If they come in and Gus is the agent, and Gus is working with them on LaserJet printers, he gets a 5 every time. He just nails it. But if they come in and Gus is talking to him about a modem, boy, that's dating myself calling it a modem, old school now. If Gus is talking to him about their modem, then it doesn't have quite the best score. So maybe it's an opportunity that we meet with somebody that does a great job of solving the problems with modems, so that we can bring Gus's overall score as high. And then maybe we have somebody else who doesn't do so great with laser printers. We can find the person that Gus is actually solving those things and getting great customer satisfaction. Again, it's the more factors you can bring together, the cooler the insights can be that you pull out. Now, all that's been possible. You back it up even before any of the Power BI or AI pieces of it. You could do that. You could export it to Excel, run some formulas against it, get some math out, run some math against it, and run some regression. It's regression analysis.
Right.
It's not a new science. However, just because it's been available doesn't mean it's been consumable or people have been able to consume it, because like I said, everybody's got their day job, and not everybody's ready to try to apply a bunch of advanced mathematics against something that they don't even know will come out with value. Now, as we bring these things like the key influencers tool that's in Power BI, which I'm extremely passionate about, I can pull that together, run it in seconds, not minutes, not hours. And hey, if it doesn't bring any value, no great loss. I'm fine. But if it does bring value, I get to be the hero that says, hey, look, I found this trend within our data that says the fact that we increase our discount, and I found this in one of the examples, the fact that we increase our discount between 15 and 25% makes very little difference in terms of the close ratio. So we're giving away discounts to people who it doesn't really move the needle in terms of closing.
Exactly.
You find that, and of course, you find that, or you find this person has a strength in, one type of problem solving, and another person has a weakness in that area. And we're just looking at data. Let's bring that in. Now we can find out how we can cross-pollinate our team to be better at solving those problems. Now that's it's the fact that the barrier to entry is lower, and saying it's easier to start tackling those problems. That's the real benefit of this. Same thing for the customer service insights or the customer service insights. It takes all this, the data that's there, and I rebuilt a lot of the customer insights using Power BI. Spent a ton of time on it.
Yeah.
Nerded out. I still couldn't get everything that was there, but I was trying to do it for the Titanic thing. So I was building it out for Titanic.
Yeah.
Of course, naturally.
Of course.
That's
your thing.
Yeah, I know. It's my thing. It's whatever. So I was building it out for that, and I said, let me try to do this, and I'm pretty comfortable with it, and I was able to reconstruct portions of it, but it took a long time.
I feel you could just go out with like a vertical for like cruise lines.
Yeah, I should.
I mean, you built that thing for like 10 years.
Oh, yeah.
That's what makes some money with that.
So as I built it, that's fine because I'm really passionate about this stuff, and I'm really I do a lot of work with it. But I started looking and said, you know what? It's fine and comfortable for me to tackle that, but for somebody who has their business and they're running their business, and it's just not their thing to get engaged on this kind of, to nerd out on Power BI, these insights are just barely out of reach for them. And it's unfortunate because they could be valuable, but now when we start seeing customer service insights come in, and now that stuff is bringing in these insights and making it available for everybody, awesome. Yeah. That's great. That's the real value. The same thing is happening on the sales side. The difference on the sales side right now is it's an even higher barrier that is being brought down. And that's the barrier to things like including the information that's associated with the Office graph, where we can say, oh, I see that Gus and Scott emailed each other more often than Gus emailed Charlie over here. But Scott has emailed Charlie a lot. And so when Gus goes in and says, I need to have a conversation with Charlie, he can immediately look inside of the insights for sales and say, oh, I can see in my organization, not just who owns the quote-unquote owns a record, but who's had email conversations or meetings, even if those meetings aren't in Dynamics. That's the real amazing part.
Yeah, when you look outside Dynamics,
you're pulling in signals that just happen naturally through the course of the business.
Yeah.
It's not that I have to track anything. It's not that I have to reach out and say, okay, I'm going to, open up Outlook and track to CRM. None of that has to happen. It's just the fact that these things are happening.
Yeah, these servers are talking to each other, right? Like Dynamics and Exchange and, at some point SharePoint, like they're all going to start talking to each other. Like, this Scott used this attachment for the sales presentations versus not using it, and trying to understand which attachments or sales, literature was more effective than others. And like, he just learns and learns and learns.
And it's not that you have to, that this stuff doesn't have APIs ready to be built against. In fact, it does have APIs. Those Office APIs have been there for a while. The difference is you had to go through all this pain and suffering to get that data brought in to build it. Whereas now Microsoft has gone and said, you know what, it's great that we were able to provide a pattern that did that, and you could go build this yourself, but we throw that out there, and this white paper's out there, but we just don't see people doing it. How about we build it ourselves, release it as a product, and say, okay, here's taking this idea that we released as an idea, but let me package it up, make it easy for you to consume. And once you start consuming it, then you're going to find the value. Or, honestly, it could be that you look and you go, there is no value. Okay, fine. You turn it off, and what have you lost?
Yeah. No, but two things. So the first thing you mentioned is you were talking about the Titanic stuff. Of course, I'm sure people have seen that presentation somewhere because you've done it several times. But the interesting part about that is that, I don't think it's a secret that as a Microsoft MVP, people know that one of the things that we do is we like to be at the forefront of stuff, testing everything. And, when you join Microsoft, you stop being an MVP because that's what happens. It's one of the things that you lose. But you still keep like that work ethic of trying everything brand new. Because I remember like just getting messages from you like on Teams or whatever. It's like, have you been playing with data streams? And I'm like, no, it was like released yesterday. Like I haven't had a chance to look into it. But you were already playing with it for Titanic and stuff. So I really love that about you. And the second thing you said was, that Microsoft is trying to make it easier for companies to get on board with this stuff. And I feel that with this AI thing, it's kind of like what happened when CRM Online came out, which up until that point, pretty much companies that could develop their own CRM solution were the only ones taking advantage of this stuff, like the Fortune 100 companies or whatever. They all had their own CRM system. They could spend millions on Siebel or whatever it was. Right. And now Microsoft comes out and says, look, for $44 per user per month, you can use this thing. You don't have to build this application. You still have to customize it, but you don't have to build this whole thing from scratch. We built it for you. We took on the pain of creating this application, and now it's yours. Go through it. I feel like AI is going through that process.
It is.
And like you said, in a lot of cases, a lot of the things that you will get with AI is something you could probably build yourself and go through the pain of doing that. And I feel that there are some companies that take the stance of, well, why would I do that? That's too much work. Like, I don't have time or whatever. But then the companies that did go through the pain of doing that are the ones that are killing it. Like, I remember I used to watch a lot of videos about Ray Dalio. Do you know who Ray Dalio is by any chance?
Doesn't ring a bell right off.
All right. So Ray Dalio is perhaps the most successful investor, like in Wall Street or whatever. Like this guy kills it. Well, everybody's suffering. He's making money for his investors or whatever. Mm-hmm. He's like this savant investor, right? Billionaire guy, right? Okay. And Ray Dalio doesn't do a whole lot of interviews or speak at conferences or whatever. But the few that he has done are like in YouTube. And like I encourage people to go see it. So he'll be him talking for an hour about how to spot like the best stock to invest in the oil industry or what. Like he goes into a level of detail where you're like, this guy's legit. Like he knows what he's talking about. But there's one video in particular, and I think this was a TED Talk that he did, which again is very rare, where he talks about what his company does, his investment firm does, when it comes to processing feedback from employees about what stock should we invest on next and what should we do next. And they take feedback from like the secretary up until him, Ray Dalio, who's like the CEO of the company, the president, and how they put it through a matrix to essentially score it. So he says, in my company, like the secretary can have more weight, more power. Her opinion can have more power than me. But this is how we do it. And he breaks it down into the scientific method of calculations and things that they go through. It's fascinating. Like I encourage people, I'll put a link on this podcast if you're interested on going to check that out. I don't remember how long it is, like 15 minutes or so, but it's mind-blowing of the work that they went through to make sure that they make the best possible decisions for their investors. And other companies might look at that and be like, well, that's insane. Like, who does that? Well, the most successful investor in the history of the world does that, because they're willing to go through the pain to see that result at the end. Now Microsoft is coming up with, we'll go through the pain to give you that same level of access, of functionality that Ray Dalio's company went through. Now we're giving it to you so you can adopt. But my fear is that because it's not immediate gratification, because you turn this on, and in a lot of cases, it sort of has to learn over time. It's interesting because sometimes customers are like, oh, that sounds awesome. Can you give me a demo right now with my data? It takes a while. The system has to learn over time, right? Yeah. You will see the results of this in the future. Now, you can say, I don't have time for it, maybe later. But the companies that say, you know what, I'm going to go for it, even though I know this is a slow process, those are the ones that are going to kill it in the future, right? Those are the future Ray Dalios, right? Yeah,
and it's interesting because, you're right. You do have to when you turn it on, some pieces you can get instantly. Some things do have to sit and cook a little bit and grow, and the process.
like the example you mentioned about emailing each other and what documents we're using. Like that's over time as you use Dynamics, you'll be able to.
It is over time, but there's also part of it if you've already been using Office.
If you've been live for a while,
if you've been on Office, even if you haven't had Dynamics, it can help you with that. The difference. I mean, one of the things that was I'm working with a gazillion-dollar bank right now. They're huge, and they've got some incredibly smart people in their teams. And the interesting thing has been one of the conversations I had over there the other day was I was kind of showing the customer service insights piece. And one of the people in the room, I don't know what he was kind of busting my chops a little bit, but he was saying, well, of course we can do that. And I was biting my tongue, but somebody else, one of the customers, one of the people in the room said it for me. They go, sure, we can do that, but have we? Exactly. What's hold us back? And and he's like, well, we have to get a project approved to do that, and we'll have to we pull some resources off this other project, and we can do that for you. And they're like, yeah, but that doesn't happen.
But we're not going to do that. Yeah.
And because these people are, they got some really brilliant data science folks in there, but they're focused on these billion-dollar problems. They've got some billion-dollar problems out there that they're trying to solve, like the investment problem that you described. But then even in that, you've got customer service agents who are struggling with things that could be some insights that could help improve the customer service process, but it's not a billion-dollar problem. It could be $1 million problem, maybe. It could be a couple of $1 million problem, but it's not a $1 billion problem, and so it gets ignored. That's where I think this process of democratization says, even if you do have, a bunch of brains on sticks walking around in the room that could solve this problem with, building some data bricks and
without our stuff.
Yeah, they build it yourself, roll it yourself, and do it. Even if you do have those people in your office, they're usually committed to other things. Now, you as a business user can flip the switch and get some insights going. Immediately. Some insights are going to take a little time to cook, but eventually, you've got that without pulling resources off the billion-dollar problems and applying them to mine. Now that's even an enterprise that has those people walking around. You move it back to a small, medium-sized business that just does, they've got their IT department that's focused on keeping their keeping networking running, making sure laptops get installed, and they just don't have people that can sit and figure out and spend time on this. Well, this kind of a democratization process flips the switch and lets you get started. Now, I will never say that you flip the switch and you have all the insights that a brilliant data scientist could give you. That's not the case. I think it gets you up and running, and it gets you insights that you don't have right now. And it might be enough. And if it is enough, wow, you've solved the problem. It's not expensive, and you're
flipping
rolling
a switch. Yeah.
And you get that without pulling yourself away from your day job. Or if you do have billion-dollar problems out there, you can flip the switch and go, hey, look, this actually has enough value that let's pull other people in and expand it. But you're starting with not from an idea, you're starting with some tangible research and some tangible assets that you can then say, you know what, we're getting enough out of this, we can build and move forward. So I see that same thing for the customer service insights. Like right now, the customer service insights one is that you're going to see a bunch of push for customer service insight over the coming year from Microsoft. That's going to be one that's the flags are going to be waved on that one a lot. And I think it's a valid one. And it's not because there's not been patterns out there that you could do this yourself. But the question is, why haven't you done it? Well, probably the pattern is because the barrier's too high. I've got a day job. I've got other things I've got to get done. I've got priorities that are pushed ahead of that. And now let's flip the switch. Now we can flip the switch and say, there is actually a way we can get over that threshold and start trying to accumulate the value and start building this and start understanding more about who our customers are, using that data that we can send back to a marketing process, using the profiles and the aggregations, all that. Then we have access to it, pretty much immediately. I mean, there's a little extreme, there's a little exaggeration, but you build that, and then you can continue to add other data sources to it. You had the first data, you had dynamics to start with, and you add other data sources. It's not a black box that you can't expand, but it is a pattern that's started for you, and you build off of it. Again, I'm passionate about the idea that just coming back to when I started in Dynamics or started in CRM 1.0 back in the day, everybody had VB apps or access apps and stuff like that somebody in the room had built something and it worked fine. It got them off and running, which was great, but other teams didn't have even that. Well, I felt like bringing CRM into the picture was a way to get people access to the experience and hard work that had already gone before and got them up and running. And then they could just say, okay, well, I've got this baseline. Now let me enhance it a little bit. Let me extend this to make this fit my business better. Let me make a change over here and bring in some new information into my sales process that I didn't have otherwise. And that same idea of the democratization of data or democratization of the process now I think is coming into the AI fold, where we're saying, okay, these processes and these ideas and these concepts and these tools exist, but there's a barrier there's a threshold which you got to learn a bunch of stuff before you can flip the switch and turn it on. Well, now with some of these tools that some of the investment Microsoft is doing, they're saying, okay, those tools are still out there, those tools are still available, but for all the people who haven't been able to take advantage of it for whatever reason, maybe it's time, maybe it's skill set. Maybe it's finding the right resources. Maybe it's just that they've got a busy day job and they can't do it. Let's make it available to them, those teams, and get it up and running. And I'm excited about that, bringing this to the masses.
Yeah, and I think one big part of bringing it to the masses is to also kind of make aware the people implementing Dynamics, or at least including some of these moving parts into solutions, which are solution architects.
Right.
In a lot of cases, when it comes to brand new features like, AI, offerings that Microsoft has released recently, the fact that solution architects are unaware of them and unaware of how they work and how they can be leveraged is a major contributor to organizations not even trying them either.
Yeah.
Like I've talked to companies that came because they work with another partner or whatever. When I talk to them about customer insights or some other kind of AI offer, they're like, what are you talking about? Like, we've never heard of this. Our partner never told us. They don't even know this exists. So what if I was a solution architect and I'm listening to this and I'm like, well, maybe I should pay attention to this stuff. Maybe this is, what I need to focus on right now. What's the easiest way to start? Like, how can I start learning about this stuff rather than just tell them, go to docs.microsoft.com and read this stuff?
Right.
What's the easiest way to get a trial or build something? Because the presentations I've seen about, let's say, the AI builder, which we haven't really talked about yet, is typically like somebody adding the capability that the camera can recognize like how many people are in a room or something like that. They show that like, look, I put it into a Canvas app. Now I take a picture. It tells me how many people are in it. Ta-da, like that's it. But then I'm like, how does that help me on like a real implementation for like a manufacturing company?
Yeah.
Like give me an example that is legit for a company rather than just like wow me with functionality, which it was cool the first time, kind of like the first time I saw HoloLens. But now somebody shows me HoloLens with the same like looking at this model motorcycle or whatever, this model, and like I've seen that 20 times. Like now show me how HoloLens will work for a real company. Like wow me first, cool, but now let's talk about the real world. That's how I feel every single presentation, and I try to go like every conference, every Dynamics 365 Saturday, whatever webinar that I see somebody talking about AI Builder specifically because I want to learn how I can leverage it. I go and it's typically the same stuff. Like, let me wow you with this stuff, but it's never really an example that I can use for like a real world implementation. So where should people start?
Yeah. So before I think you're definitely onto something there, and I've been guilty of it. And I usually call those party tricks. They're party trick demonstrations. It's like, hey, this is a cool thing, and we flip a switch here and do something neat. Okay, that's helpful. I mean, I'm not going to dismiss and say that you should never do that, because I think that's a first stage. That's a first step in saying, okay, here's a feature that just has this that we can do. It's a party trick. It's the next stage onto that solution architects, if they are solution architects, and again, I have been doing it long enough that I've been on both sides of this. I've been on the hopefully on the good side more than the bad side of it, but on both sides where we say, hey, look at this feature. Let me show you something that I can wave and go, look at this magical thing. And everybody goes, and the business goes, yeah, whatever.
So what?
It's the people, and in the emphasis on not a technical architect, but a solution architect. And I'll call it out, despite sometimes those get interchanged in people's titles. But a technical architect can go, I can understand how the gears work, and I can understand how I can add this piece to that piece and get it to do something. Right? The solution architects that are out there that really look at both the technical side and understand the business perspective on what it can do, that's the real value. That's the real stronger value that can say, okay, let's step beyond the idea of a party trick demo, and let's move to something that says, here's a use, a real world use case. Now, in my example, I mean, we mentioned Titanic earlier on. In my Titanic example, and by the way, if you're coming to the CRM Huge Summit in October, I do have a session on Titanic, and I'm doing it full time. I'm going to do a full Titanic. Nice. We'll sink that boat again. But in that example, I've tried to say, okay, here are technologies, but let's work them into a storyline of how they would work together to solve a fictitious company but with real applicable types of problems. The problems are very much applicable to other organizations, even though I've done it on a fictitious organization. Exactly. But it's that idea of saying, but because the trick is on that process, once you move past the party trick and you say, let me build it into an application, let me build it into a solution that the problem that the business is facing is first, and the technology has to serve that business problem, as opposed to saying, here's a technology, let me show you what the technology does. There's a real difference. I mean, try to say it a better way, but
I totally agree. So there's a difference between telling people how something works and then telling people how that would benefit their business.
Right.
Those are two different things.
And honestly, the great thing for the real thing that's helped me is as I've tackled new technologies, and just because it's kind of my thing, is I try to bring that back into the Titanic story. Really quickly, I find gaps.
Yeah. This wouldn't help the Titanic or whatever. Yeah.
Right. Well, I find like, okay, I've gotten this far with the technology, but here's a piece that I need in order to complete the story for this customer. Or if I reshape the problem a bit and come at the problem a little differently, I can use the technology to solve that. But it's really an understanding of that process. I think I have done the party trick where you stand up and you show a feature, you wave it, and you go, well, look, it does this, it recognizes, what's on the shelf. That's great. It recognizes a widget that I've laid on the table. That's cool. But then when you look at what some of the vendors that are doing it, using it in the real world, where they're going out and saying, okay, now I've put this into my Power App, and I can point it at the shelf and see what products are stocked and not stocked. Those people have gone a step further and said, okay, now I've taken a legitimate look and said, I've applied the cool widget to a real problem, and it's solving it. The thing that if you do that and you get in touch with Microsoft as you're doing that, you will get an amazing amount of attention if you can show that here's where I'm trying to apply that into a real world example. I know some of the people the messaging that I hear back is, here's a widget and it doesn't work the way I want it to work.
Yep.
That's okay. That's something. Okay. But when you look and say, here's a business problem I'm trying to solve.
Now let's
and
pay
the
attention.
Widget sort of fixes it, or it doesn't sort of fix it, or it's the widget plus just a little bit more would solve the problem. And here's the problem. And this problem is similar to these other problems that I've had before. That's where you get, you're going to started getting calls from product managers left and right going, can we talk to you about this other thing we're doing? Can we talk to you about this other thing?
Absolutely.
That's one of the pieces that I've found to be really beneficial from my involvement. Now, kind of crossing the chasm from being an implementer with one of the vendors to being on the inside working for Microsoft. Even though I'm not on the engineering and product teams, every time I go to them, which I go probably more than anybody. I mean, I'm a little bit, I don't mean to, I have to always tread lightly to be sure that I'm not being a jerk about stuff, because I want to go, all right, here's what we have.
That's not how it works.
It's not working this way in reality, or it's not, here's how far I can take it. But once I get to this point, there's a cliff, and it just doesn't solve. Here's the types of problems that I need to solve. A lot of the problems that a lot of the examples, they work fine as long as you work for Contoso, or you work for AdventureWorks Bicycles. As long as you have those, or Fabricam or Woodruff Bank, all those fictitious companies.
Is it a Fourth Coffee?
And then Blue Sky Airlines. That's another
exactly.
one. As long as you work for those contrived examples, it's fine. But then when you start bringing in a real world problem, here's where it falls apart. That's been I've been able to be. I feel like I've been useful to the product teams in that I've been able to give solid business application feedback.
But that's also part of what you used to do as an MVP.
Right.
You just continue to do the same thing. That's why I said that they can take the title from you, but you're still doing the same thing.
Yeah, I still do. I still
helping out the community.
I still complain a lot.
Trying with stuff, helping the product team improve. And it's funny because, I see there's an episode. I don't remember if it was, I think it was a podcast episode about mistakes that aspiring MVPs make. And one of those mistakes is comparing yourself to MVPs.
Oh, yeah.
And I think I talked about, on that episode, I talk about the fact that there's a lot of stuff that happens behind the scenes that you just don't know about. Yeah. That I didn't know because I made that mistake of comparing myself with MVPs when I wasn't an MVP. And I was like, I do more than that guy. And then I became an MVP and I'm like, wow, that guy does a lot more than me that I had no idea about because it happens all behind the scenes. Yeah. Even recently, like there are some things that I've done myself that kind of like all the MVPs are like, wow, that's awesome. And I just can't talk about it. Like it's just people will never know the stuff that happens behind the scenes. So I'm glad that you're in there, still in the battle.
And part of that process is also understanding that the people that I work with that are in the product team, it's easy to go, Microsoft is blah, and fill out a blank, and you can call it, or if only Microsoft would X, whatever that fill in the blank is. And when you kind of now being on the inside of it, it's almost like I will say, it's like the Matrix. There is no Matrix, and in the Matrix is everything. Okay. So when you're inside of Microsoft, there is not one master being that just sort of controls everything.
The architect.
Right. Satya Nadella has a lot of things on his plate.
Yeah, exactly.
But, deciding how a workflow engine shows up inside of Dynamics is not part of his. That's not on his agenda. And some of the folks that move into the product that work on it have long, deep experience with that product. In fact, I'm working with somebody on the Power BI for the April release. I'm working with somebody on the Power BI. How it works with Dynamics for next year, and the person I'm working with has, I won't say his name, but you would know him. He's been with the team for years and years and years.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, I was working with somebody on the View editor, and I was having to kind of gently explain how entities work because they got pulled off. They're fine, brilliant programmers, but they just never use the product. So it's kind of this balance of you have to.
They don't use it in the real world. They're not out there working with customers and users selling them. Dynamics doesn't do this, and you're like, yeah, you just hit advanced fine.
So
they're not doing it for real.
You work with these folks, and you go, okay, number one, they're people. Okay, they make mistakes.
Yeah,
they
miss things.
They have visibility.
They haven't thought of things.
They have visibility into what they have visibility into. They don't have omniscient visibility.
Right.
Occasionally some people think they do, but that's all right. It's all right. I mean, most the people that I've worked with genuinely, the pattern is they genuinely want to do a good job.
Yes. And I think in a lot of it comes also the feedback, right? When the feedback comes, like you mentioned, from an actual business issue that you're trying to resolve, and you're saying, look, the tool that you're introducing, the functionality you're introducing, or the functionality you're deprecating is helping me or not helping me in this or that way with a specific example, they always listen. I've never been turned away from Microsoft saying, like, too bad, we don't care. Never has happened.
Now, what you do get is, these are people, and if you go in saying, oh, this sucks.
That's not, come on.
Yeah. I was talking to somebody yesterday, and they just want to complain about stuff, and I'm like, look, let's work together. Let's find the solution to this. Just complaining about it doesn't solve it.
Yeah.
Let's figure out a way. And it's the same thing. Man, I'm just kind of wandering all over this place, all over this storyline here. But
I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to name this episode.
That's right. I know.
I thought I had a title in mind, but now I don't know.
It's all part of the Matrix.
I think I'm going to call it Scott Sewell Part 2.
Right. The idea was that if you stepped in and started working through the process with them, and say, and I never go into one of these conversations with. Number one, I never go in saying this sucks. I always go in saying, okay, here's the problem I'm trying to solve. Here's how I've approached it with the tool so far. Here's where the gap that I ran into. can you help me with either, is the gap because I don't understand what the tool was designed for? Is it trying to solve, am I trying to solve the problem with the right tool? Is the tool is there a gap in the tool? And I usually try to say, if within the tool I could add this feature, I could solve the problem that I have, and here are the other types of problems that I would be able to solve if I had a feature that allowed me to accomplish this. I never try to say, just give me an easy button, a button that if I just had a button that did, solve my single issue problem right now.
Yeah.
Say, okay, here's the feature set, here's the problems that I'm trying to solve, and I need it to be able to do X. And I don't know if that's just an extension of what you already have, or is there another problem? Anyway, trying to be collaborative, and honestly, the folks that I work with have been phenomenally eager to get real world feedback, because it's funny because you got a product manager who designs something on a whiteboard, and coming up, and they have to spend a lot of time writing specs and writing, defending how they're going to design it and everything, and it's not real, but they're doing it all sort of conceptually there. Then it gets thrown over the fence to a programmer who tries to take that and turn it into a real world, application of that problem. And it's not until you get it to a user into a level which you can use it, that then the cycle starts becoming virtuous, and you start saying, oh, I see what you've done here. Here's how I'm using that. Here's what I'm solving. And here's the edges that I run into. Here's the bumpers that I need to adjust for. And again, that's that cycle. We're going back to the AI part of the conversation. That's the cycle that they are hungry for. They being Microsoft. I'm putting air quotes around it. It's the people that are leading these parts of the product are saying, look, we have this process that's out here that's well known, and the barriers to entry were too high. Now we're bringing it forward, and we're making it consumable and easy to tackle without building out this monstrous monstrous thing in Azure. And they're looking for where are the gaps? What have you solved with it, and what kind of problems are you trying to solve that the tool almost gets to,
Makes sense.
It's been fun. It's been a fun evolution. And if you want to be, honestly, Microsoft is constantly looking for people who will have that feedback that can be constructive feedback.
Absolutely. So going back to kind of the question that we asked about 20 minutes ago before we started going in all kinds of directions.
Sorry.
What is, and to wrap up the episode, where should people go to learn more, to get started?
To learn more, right. Yeah. So sorry, I just wandered all over the place there. In my mind, go to the web, just go to the Microsoft site. There's always a trial available. It's got trial data in it. Look at the trial data. Look at that. You'll probably see by the time, I don't know when this podcast releases, but by the time this is out, there is going to be some more assets, videos, et cetera, that will be released specifically around customer service. customer AI, customer insights. Be more value there.
Yeah.
The other part of it is, again, there's pretty frequently there's a free trial available that not only can you use it against some sample data that's already there, which gives you the first level of visibility to it, but usually you can spin it up against your own data fairly easily.
Yeah.
And
copy it, right? Copy your production environment to a sandbox, spin up this thing, go to town, right?
Try it.
Play with it.
Yeah. And again, it's not going to be, it's not like you flip on a light switch and you get instantly you have insights. Sometimes it does take a little bit to cook on that data. And sometimes you put it in there and say, okay, let me add a little bit more data from another source. Let me add a little bit more here and see, and you're going to incrementally. And then it's always one of those things, what is it? You overestimate what you can do in a day, and you underestimate what you can do in a month, or vice versa, something like that. Anyway, it's one of those philosophical. One of those smart people said that, but I can't remember what it was. It's the idea that you'll be surprised in a month, or you'll be surprised in 6 months how unbelievably far you've come with it.
Yeah.
By just taking small incremental steps.
Definitely.
Don't try to boil the ocean to the first day. Take a step, add some more data to it, reflect on it, and think about, how did this help me? How does this influence it? Or what am I starting to see? And then bounce it off your business leaders. If you're a solution architect, bounce it off of somebody on the business side and say, don't worry about the technology. Let me just give you an answer. Let me show you some answers. I was doing this in a casino years ago. I was doing this in a casino and was running regression analysis against the servicing of slot machines. How those things work and operate, and the failures, the electronic failures of them at different times. Things like coin jams, and this is back in the day when they had bill validators, where you'd put a bill into it and it would check to see if it was a counterfeit, or if you'd photocopied the bill, or it would reject it or whatever. But a lot of times you try to, just like you do in a Coke machine, you stick a bill in, it goes tries to kick it back. Well, those BV rejections, I was starting to look at patterns within the BV rejections, bill validator rejections, and try to find out looking for helping them predict which machines would work or not work, or which ones had problems, or try to find patterns of what's going on. And in that first data set, I spent a long time getting my data together. I was running in Excel, running some SQL against it, and just nerding out, having a great time looking at this information. Did not have any insight whatsoever into how to win on the stuff. Zero insight there, but looking at just the mechanics of the thing. And I came up with this one machine that seemed to fail about every 12 hours or so. Not exactly.
Right.
But there was
more often than the other ones.
Oh, way more often than the other ones.
Right.
But it was on a pattern that it would typically get repaired by one person on one shift, and by the time it came up again, it was another person on a different shift that would see it. And you've been in a casino, and you look around, and there's a gazillion of these machines, and they all look the same, right?
Right.
Well, they couldn't, as an individual, looking at all this data that's out there by looking at these machines or looking at a stack of work orders.
Yeah, it wasn't noticeable.
There was no pattern to it, visible.
Right.
But it wasn't until we started applying some AI to it that we started saying, hey, here's some patterns that show up.
Yeah.
And here's some patterns of what's happening the floor of this equipment, all this equipment. Is this, and I took it to the shop manager and said, I just want to validate this. I'm seeing this pattern happening. And he was like, no, that's not right. That can't be right. That's not accurate. and I was like, okay, I'm here trying to learn. I was trying to apply, for once trying to be humble about it, and trying to go in and say, let me understand more about what's going on. And I applied, and so he said, no, that can't be right, because the machines don't fail like that. And while we're standing there talking, I said, great. I'm trying to get the understanding of it. And so he said, no problem. But while we're standing there, his radio crackles. And a guy on the shop floor said, hey, I need to go over and fix the machine. And he read out the machine number. And it was the same one that I was showing him there, showing the shop manager right there, that this is a machine that's failing consistently, failing and then being repaired. And the funny thing was, the shop manager just rolled his eyes and laughed, and got on the radio and said, actually, don't repair it, pull it off the floor, let's bring it in the shop, figure out what's actually happening with it. And the guy goes, no, I can fix it. He goes, don't worry, I've got the data, we need to get it fixed. And it was one of those things, and the shop manager kind of laughed and said, well, you got me on that one. We had a good fun time, but the reality is you can take this information. If you just nerd it out on it and have a little party trick with it, there's no value. Take it to your business. Try it out. See if they find value in it. Add a little bit more to it. Find some more value in it. I think you can ultimately turning it into a solution. So that, try it out. Try it on build your a Titanic, whatever your version of the Titanic is. Build that. Right. Try it out on that data. Try it out on customer data going, hey, do you mind if I just use some of this and see if I can understand some insights? You really do want some real world data, because if you're not using the Microsoft's contrived example, use some real world data, because if you just do pure random data, downloading some stuff on Mockery or whatever,
it's harder to get insight from that.
Yeah, there's no patterns in that. It's just pure random noise. Right. Get some real data, get some real stuff, and just try it.
Definitely.
And even if it's a slight advantage, even if it's a slight improvement, you're still going to probably return dollars to the business, even if they can say, hey, you know what? If Gus takes them to the studio experience early in the sales cycle, Gus is winning in those examples. Let's get everybody to sort of move up how early they go to the studio experience and have them kind of follow Gus's examples. And that turns into dollars immediately.
Yeah, sometimes it's interesting to have that perspective. Like I remember working with a customer that they did, I think they had to put together a sales report at the end of the month, and it took him about an hour to do it. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't a big pain because it's only an hour a month. So I said, look, I think we can automate this for like $10,000, and you don't have to do it. The system will just do the reports for you.
Right.
And they said, it's only an hour a month, like $10,000 for an hour a month. Right. And I said, well, that's 12 hours a year. Mm-hmm. And let's say, do you think if you had 12 more hours a year, you could potentially close one more deal? And the sales guy was like, yeah, I think if I had one more day, I think that would be the time I spent closing a deal. And I said, well, how much is the average profit every time you close a deal? It was $50,000. Mm-hmm. So it's like you're going to invest $10,000 to get per salesperson the ability to close one more deal a year. It was totally worth it. So sometimes you tend to downplay it because you don't see kind of the future of what you can make. So now that we're wrapping up the episode, if anyone else, any other casino wants to hire you or anyone else wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Twitter's probably LinkedIn, number one. Yeah. Probably LinkedIn is. I stay on LinkedIn. It's really interesting because I see more stuff around business and around the topics that I'm interested in the LinkedIn feed, and I'll respond to messages through LinkedIn. I still work on Twitter some, just to look at Twitter, and some things are just kind of random. I'll broadcast. But then some stuff in Twitter just makes me angry, so I turned it off. So those would be the primary things. So LinkedIn, and I'm only Scott Sewell, currently in New York, soon to be Tennessee.
Yeah.
But the Scott Sewell that works for Microsoft.
Awesome. And I'll put the links to your LinkedIn and your Twitter on the description. So thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully we'll do it again in Tennessee, since now you'll be closer to Atlanta where I live.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And obviously going to the conferences. I think this episode will come out on the Sunday right before CRMEG Summit. So for
fantastic.
those, there's going to be a lot of people listening to it while the summit is going or almost starting. So hopefully they get to attend your session and see the Titanic in person, right?
I'm going to do two sessions. One's the Titanic and the other one is an AI one. And in the AI one, by the time I get to the summit session, by the time you actually hear this, I will have some new assets that I don't have right now.
That's awesome.
I'm looking forward to. So it's and I can't talk about them yet until I get my hands on them until they say it's okay. And so hopefully by that point I'll have my grubby little hands on some new assets.
Awesome. And yes, thank you for tuning in to this episode of the podcast. Don't forget that all of our episodes are at crmmvppodcast.com. Follow us on Twitter. You can also email us at info@crmmvppodcast.com for suggestions or with suggestions for future episodes or with questions or comments about the episode. Thanks again for coming, and we'll see you in the next one.
Thanks.